I used to spend hours writing down words and repeating them out loud just to forget them the day after. The truth is, the common way to learn vocabulary is not meant for how your brain actually learns. And science shows there's 5 rules you have to follow to make words actually stick. And when I started applying them myself, I went from forgetting everything I learned, wasting my time, to now speaking 4 languages fluently. The first rule is the frequency principle, and this will decide if your effort is going to lead to real fluency or just be a waste of time. See, effective vocabulary learning actually starts before even learning, so getting the start right is crucial. My first experience learning languages was taking Spanish back in middle school, and I remember my homework used to be the most ridiculous stuff. Me and a friend of mine could not for the life of us introduce ourselves or hold a basic conversation in Spanish. But the words we were asked to learn were like every animal that exists, from beavers to sharks to giraffes. And this is such a waste of time, but it's unfortunately really common. And science proves this. There's something called Zipf's law, and understanding it is a massive unlock for any language learner. What it basically says is that the most common word in a language is twice as common as the second most common one, which is twice as common as the third one, and that goes up to infinity. Which means that by choosing the right words, you could be spending way less time, but getting way more fluent in the process. So before you even start learning anything, always ask yourself, is this the most important word that I need right now? If that's not a clear yes, and if you don't absolutely need to know this word, don't bother learning it. Because the reality is that oftentimes, learning fewer words but learning them better is way better than learning way more words but learning them worse. The next rule is the foundation to your entire language learning routine, and without it, you could be spending hours but getting practically nothing back. And it's the quality principle. And most popular language learning methods completely miss this. The way most people go about learning vocabulary is that they see a word like apple, and then they look at the definition and they think, oh, apple means this. Okay, yeah, I got it. And if they're smart, they might even make a flashcard out of it or write it down and then repeat it a few times. But unfortunately, this is not at all how your brain actually learns words. Here's how learning actually works and why quality is so important. The more focus and attention and information you give to any specific repetition of a word, the more gains that repetition gives you. It's like in the gym. If you have a heavy weight, you're gonna have to do fewer reps. But if you're lifting a literal feather, it doesn't matter how many reps you do because it's just not heavy enough. Which means that to learn a language effectively, we need to find a way to metaphorically increase the weight of each repetition of a word. And the simplest way to do that, which is 100% proven in learning science, is via context. Your brain learns new things by connecting them to pre-existing concepts and knowledge. So if you try to learn a word like happy by just seeing happy and the translation, it's going to be way harder than if you add an image of a smiling person, or you add a sentence saying I am happy, or maybe you watch a video of someone talking about a happy experience and them using the word happy. Now, your brain is actually going to have some information and context to grasp onto, and it's going to be 10 times easier to remember the things you're trying to learn. Because each individual word is not just learned as an individual puzzle piece. It's learned as a part of a bigger puzzle, and without knowing that puzzle, it's going to be incredibly hard to remember it. So how we apply this practically is just making sure we always have plenty of context in our language learning routine. That doesn't mean you always learn words in context, but it does mean that you should ideally add things like example sentences to your flashcards, or add a whole sentence to your notebook instead of just one word. And at minimum, to have something like reading or watching YouTube videos as a part of your routine to fill in this context that your brain desperately needs to remember these words. But unfortunately, the quality of your repetition doesn't matter much without the next rule, because it's what decides if the words are actually going to stick long term or not. Rule number 3 is the repetition principle. I remember my first few weeks of learning Japanese. I used to watch videos and take notes on the words that I saw, and sometimes I got extra interested in the word or I didn't really get it right away, and so I spent hours sometimes researching individual words and all the little nuances and the context around it. Now, that's not bad per se, but the problem was that I kept filling up my notebook without ever going back to it. And I see this problem so frequently in language learners. Science shows we need to see a word around 10 to 12 times before it's fully learned. The good news about that is that by adding more context and by doing it better the first time, that number can go down a little bit. But it's still not going to be just one time. So no matter how much effort you put in when you try to learn, you're still going to have to review it multiple times, which means that you need to find a way to repeatedly get exposure to these words over time. That might be lowering the amount of words you're trying to learn a little bit. I see so many people focusing on just the number of words, like, I learned 40,000 words in a week. And that sounds good on paper, but it's rarely going to actually lead to some real fluency. So be aware of that. And if you want to learn more about systems like this and practical advice for language learning, you should check out the free 21-day fluency email course that I have in the first link in the description. Now, aside from getting good quality and just getting the repetitions in, there's actually a key nuance about how to get these repetitions in that most learners tend to forget completely. Rule number 4 is the spacing principle. If you ever try to cram in a bunch of knowledge the night before an exam, you'll know that after it's done, you probably forgot half of it. But in that night, if we think about it, you actually got a lot of quality, you probably thought about it a lot, and you also got repetition. You probably reviewed the material at least like 10 times, right? So why do you forget it long term? Well, here's where spacing comes in. Learning something happens when your brain takes information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. And a very important part of that happening is having enough quality and enough context to begin with, like we talked about. That's what's actually going to tell your brain whether the thing is important to learn or not. But your brain is also like a cleaner that wants maximum efficiency. So if it notices that you haven't gone back to this word in a few days, it's going to start to wonder and think that maybe this word wasn't so important after all. So it gets filtered out and forgotten. The key fix is understanding this principle. 10 repetitions on one day is not nearly the same thing as 10 repetitions across a week or 2. So spacing out your learning over time is a game changer. And science proves this often gives twice the results of cramming stuff. The simplest way to do this without going insane by having to count the exact amount of days between each review is just using an app like Anki. It is my personal favorite app, but there's other flashcard apps too. There you just write the word down and you insert maybe a little phrase using it, and then the app itself will take care of the exact time between your reviews based on an algorithm that shows you the word again right before you're about to forget it. If you combine this rule with the other ones, you'll have a really solid foundation for learning words and remembering them effortlessly. But the fifth one is what decides if it's going to turn into real fluency or just get stuck in your head. And it is the recall principle. If you know a word but you struggle to use it when it's time to have a conversation, here's why. Your brain learns in 3 stages. The first one is encoding. This is where you take in the information for the first time, and it's mainly done through having enough quality and a few repetitions. The second part is about storage, and here's where we make sure that it stays in your memory for the long term. That's done through having plenty of repetitions across time so that you don't forget it. But the third part is what's most important, and that's where people tend to stop. It is retrieval. See, if you don't have a way to turn passive words active, you'll always suck at using them when it's time to have a real conversation, even if you know them. But the way to fix this is pretty easy, and we do that by using active recall, which is probably the most proven effect in all of learning science. Here's how it works. Reading word lists, watching videos, and using flashcards the normal way all build your passive vocabulary. You start by seeing the word that you want to learn, and then you have to remember what it means. Active learning is the opposite, where you start with knowing what you want to say, and then taking the words and the language that you know from your head and translating it into a real sentence in the language that you want to speak. This is the exact skill that's needed for conversations, and that's why it's so important to practice it and not just leave the words sitting in here passively. This can be done in many ways, but the best and simplest way to do this is by just regularly speaking. Specifically, speaking with the goal of using words that you're not 100% comfortable with. When we often speak, we can tend to fall back into the habit of just using the words and the grammar structures that we know well and that we're comfortable with. But if we try to push ourselves and we remember that we're here to improve, then we can remember the words that we kind of passively know in the back of our head, and we bring them out and we try to use them. And if we completely misuse them, then the person in front of us is going to laugh at us and call us stupid, but that's fine, because we're probably going to get some valuable feedback. This process will force us to go from nothing to a full sentence using just our memory. And it's gonna be hard at first, and you'll mess up a lot. But your brain doesn't learn when things are easy. It learns through challenge. So try to reframe this feeling of it being hard and you making mistakes into actual progress, because that's exactly what it is. Combining these 5 principles means that you learn the best words in the best way many times over time, and you use them in a real conversation too. If you have those, you'll never struggle learning another word ever again. And you can always look at a method and see if it hits all 5 rules or not to determine if it's effective or not. But learning words is obviously not enough. So if you want to learn how to actually get fluent in a language, you should check out my full guide to language learning here. There I cover every part of the process, how to build the perfect routine for language learning, and much more. I'll see you there. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep learning.